Hey, cabin lovers, welcome back to another episode of the My Dream Log Cabin podcast. I'm so excited to have you here with me. I'm your host, Lindsay Sutherland, and this podcast is brought to you by Caribou Creek Handcrafted Log Homes. Hey, cabin lovers, welcome back to My Dream Log Cabin podcast. I'm your host, Lindsay Sutherland, and today joining me is Dale Mulfinger from Minnesota. So excited to have you here. He is an architect with Sala Architects, and we're going to deep dive into, cabin architecture and a little bit on, how an architect can come into the play when it comes to designing your dream cabin. So Dale, thanks for joining us.
Oh, it's great to be here. It's always fun to chat about cabins.
Yeah, it is. I understand you're quite the expert. Tell us a little bit about your history with that.
I'm an architect that got eventually involved in residential architecture, doing additions, remodelings, and new homes in the metropolitan Twin Cities. And about a decade into it, a client asked me to design a cabin. I didn't know anything particular about cabins since I didn't have one in my family. And so I decided, given that I was also teaching at the university, I should start researching, well, what is a cabin? What does it look like? What different cabins are there? So I headed out into cabin land with a group of students, and we said, we'll look for the quintessential cabin. And of course, they immediately said, well, what's that? And I said, well, that's the point of it. We don't know what it is, but if we find 10 of them, then maybe we can say, well, why does this one feel more cabin-like than another? And so I had 10 students, each found 10 cabins. And after 100 cabins, we were, I wouldn't say we were experts, but we were beginning to learn something about what seems to feel comfortable as a cabin. So that started me down the path of researching cabins. And then I started writing articles and eventually writing books on the subject. And then I also started designing cabins. So I've had about a 30-year history of designing cabins, mostly in Minnesota and Wisconsin, but also in other parts of the United States.
That's pretty cool. I'm excited. So that's what we're talking about today is what now I'm curious, what defines a quintessential cabin after 100 views?
Well, I think some of the things is to distinguish, say, a cabin from a lake home. And to us, a cabin was something where you knew the coffee was brewing in the morning because you could smell it. It was brewing about 10 feet away from your head. And so I think a cabin was a modest space. It definitely didn't have a master bedroom suite. It didn't have an attached garage. And it was a good, a decent sized space, but one where everything kind of happened in one room. But maybe there was a sleeping compartment, maybe not. So that seems, and then it probably had an awful lot of wood in it, one way or another. Either it was made of logs or it was sheathed in wood. So those were some of the attributes.
That's pretty cool. And it's true, just listening to you, smelling the coffee, I'm like, yes, I can imagine that, waking up and feeling that, I don't know, that coziness, that space that even in the summer, even if cozy is a word that I think a lot of times people associate with winter and a fire, but I think there's ways to keep it cozy even in the summer and spring.
Another thing I think we learned about cabins is that cabins were not about having privacy. They were about intimacy and friendship, and you accepted the fact that you might hear Uncle Ben snoring because he was in the bunk bed above you or something. So, you enjoyed your friends or family that you had with you to the point that privacy wasn't an issue.
I have 4 children, so I can assure you privacy matters to me. It's fun when I'm on vacation, though. That's
Yeah,
for sure.
that's right.
We
That's
can
right.
all take care of it there. So when you started designing cabins and now you're building them for people for their, hunting cabin or their getaway, their vacation home, have you done any that were their permanent residence? Like, was that
Oh,
coming
many,
up? Many?
many, and if not necessarily their permanent resident on the day we designed them, they were thought to be permanent resident homes out in the future. So that became probably about particularly a decade ago, that became a much more common phenomenon where people were not only saying this is going to be a legacy cabin for our family, but we're actually going to live in it 9 months out of the year, and maybe the other 3 months we'll go south to where it's warm.
Mm-hmm. Did that change anything for you on the design structure?
I think it changed. There's a greater desire for privacy when you have a cabin where you're going to live in for some time. So there's then you might have, a unique bedroom suite that the owner's suite or something like that uh, might be more common. Also, a focus on, say, at least having one or the primary bedroom on the main floor so that it can be lived in over a time frame when people might become a little more infirm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. How now, when you're designing it, are there any certain characteristics, or I guess what's the process like? Like what goes on through your creative mind as
Sure.
you're coming to that
Well, first it
decision?
starts with the land,
Mhm.
because in where I design, I would say 95% of our cabins we're doing are on water. That's
Okay.
more predominantly a lake, but occasionally a river. I'm doing one right now on the Missouri River in northeast Kansas. But I would say commonly for me, I'm working on lake property. So it always begins with learning a little bit about what your clients want in terms of, are they looking for a larger structure, or smaller structure, whatever, but then really not putting pencil to paper until you've actually seen the property and spent a little bit of time on the property, understanding how the topography works. Where's where's the driveway likely to be coming in? Where's the sunshine coming from? Where do we have to protect from the winds? All of those things become important as you're thinking about, well, my client has expressed a desire to wake up in the morning and have her cup of coffee, where the sun is coming in. Well, then it's on the east side of the cabin. So you think about those things as you're beginning the project. Then every project comes with a budget. People might have a lot of money to spend or not a lot of money to spend. And so one has to be cognizant of how one lays a structure out so that you can hopefully achieve most of what they want, but still be able to fit it into a structure that seems attainable in their budget.
Mm-hmm. And that is another thing too. I'm curious about, when you're doing that design phase, listening to your client tell you kind of the things that they want. How do you have a process, I suppose, for factoring that? Or I mean, you've done a lot of cabins. Maybe you kind of just have an instinct.
I would say I rely pretty heavily on my instincts because I've done so many of them, so I know which patterns tend to work or don't work. But then every client is a little bit unique, and they may want unique features or have unique ideas for how, um, relative to these issues of privacy or not. And they may be very concerned about their view. They may be very concerned about energy performance. So and they may have strong proclivities about character. Do they want something that's rustic and old, or might they necessarily want something that's quite modern and evocative? You might say of something very unique. So all of those things need to be taken into account up front. And then we're usually designing with probably at first presenting to our clients a few different ideas, not just one answer, but saying, well, we could do a little of this, we could do that, and then having a good meeting with the clients, say, what do you think of that? And then they usually, by the way, arrive with maybe lots of Pinterest pictures or images or some of my, books that they might bring and say, well, we really like this cabin, in this picture here. And then I may have to say, well, I don't think you can afford that one, but let's see if we can't figure out a way to use some of the attributes of that. So
Yeah.
there's a lot that goes into what you first think about when you're heading down the design path.
hmm And that's true. A lot of times, what's attracting them to that image is the feel. There's something in that picture that's invoking a feeling, and that's really what they're going for, I think.
I,
So,
I
what,
would I would say that's most commonly true. And you
yeah.
have to, that's why you have to ask your clients, what about this picture interested you? Because if you look at the holistic attribute of what you see in the picture, that may be not what they were after. They may be, not after that timber frame. They may be after some other, they love that the particular fireplace or something like that.
The fireplace. That's always such a topic.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh my gosh, what's one of the coolest fireplaces you've ever built? Or staircases for that matter. I think they are both usually pretty significant focal points for people.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot to be learned about, various stairway options and um, whether or not you've got a lot of room and can have a more dramatic stairway, or I haven't talked about the stairway as stage. It's a stage for people coming down. It's a place where you take the picture of your daughter and her first boyfriend, that kind of thing. So, but then there's also the kind of stair you can afford if you've got a really cramped little cabin. And for instance, I do a lot of alternating tread stairs uh, because they're smarter, let's say, than a ladder, but take less space than a full blown stairway, and are fairly safe to go up and down. Uh, So yeah, stairs are something to have a good chat with your clients about. And then you mentioned fireplaces. A big issue on fireplaces is how are they going to perform if you're not around? And are they going to be a heat loser or a heat gainer for your structure? And so we tend to do a lot of fireplaces that have some means of closure when you're not there, even if it means you've just gone to bed and you don't want to let those simmering coals suck all the heat out of your cabin. Uh, so energy performance in a fireplace is particularly important to us. And then, of course, there's the look of a fireplace. Is it a dramatic feature in the cabin? Can they afford a dramatic feature in the cabin? Or is it a fairly pragmatic element that gives them a flickering flame when they want it?
Yeah, I would say if I could do my cabin over again, I would. I like the idea of the open hearth type of, because we have just a wood stove. I like
Sure.
the idea of the open hearth because it makes you feel a little bit closer to that connection of the fire and just the glow and the warmth. But I also like the idea of it being, well, I like the idea of it being contained because of my kiddos, but also, then you have like less smoke and less things like that. There's just this trade-off though that can come with that open fireplace. It's interesting how
Yeah,
they can just create a different atmosphere.
there are a group of companies now that make a fireplace that has what's generally referred to as a guillotine door, so
Okay.
that it's actually, a metal box unit that you build your fireplace around, and the door is up above the opening of the firebox. And it has actually, some of the manufacturers have two doors. One is a screen door that you can slide down to protect you from sparks flying, into the rug you happen to have near the fireplace. Or they have a glass door you can bring down so that you can stop the heat loss when you're not around, um, or just watch the fire from through the glass door. So there are at least three manufacturers that make those, and that's a pretty common firebox unit that we use when we're doing a full-fledged fireplace.
Oh, neat. That's new. I did not know that. That's pretty cool. Thank you for sharing.
Well, and one of those companies calls their unit the Antoinette, appropriate for Marie Antoinette, who was guillotined. So,
That's
yeah.
great. I love it. They totally embraced it. That's fantastic. I was going to ask you, what do you think is the time, when is it appropriate for somebody to reach out to an architect? Some people might be thinking, I mean, a cabin is a pretty simple thing. The general contractor could probably design it. I mean, what makes you unique as far as when it comes to designing a cabin, and why should somebody reach out to an architect in this case?
Sure, that's a good question. And I would say if you feel comfortable with a plan you've already found in a book or something, or through the builder, and it's a plan that's already known, go ahead and use that. But if you're feeling that you don't have a plan that works well for your site and your particular interests for space, then an architect is uniquely qualified to be able to design something particular to you that meets, you know, meets all of the criteria of site and budget and space and so forth.
Mm-hmm.
That's what we're trained to do, and you know, we're trained to design unique things. And I would say, you know, it's interesting that so many of our clients come to us and say, you know, we think of ourselves as really weird. We're wanting something special. We can't seem to find it. And I usually tell them, no, you're not weird. You're just like every other client who comes to us. We get the people who want something a little bit different than what they can find on the normal open market.
Mm-hmm. And it's interesting also to think that that can continue to be, that's just the beauty of art, you know, that
Yeah,
it can
yeah,
continue to be reinvented each time. You know, that is just so fun. I love it. I bet you love it too. That's why you've been doing it for so long
yeah,
and you
yeah.
haven't veered off of that path.
Well, and I think some of us who uniquely do cabins are also uh, well trained, well educated within the subject of cabins. So I have an incredible collection of books that I use relative to cabins, either from old books like Chilson Aldrich, which is the Real Log Cabin book, if you've ever seen that, or William Wick's Cabins and Cottages from the 1920s. And sometimes we're drawing references of historic cabins from those books.
Okay. Do you have one that you've designed that you think is one of your most like unique? I know they're all unique, but like
Yeah,
one that stands out maybe?
yeah, there is one that stands out that can see if you can see this picture. Can you get that?
Okay, yes. It almost looks like is it two-story?
Yeah, it's two stories. So as you know a lot about log construction, you know that logs settle and they settle by shrinking diameter of each log. And so a two-story cabin shrinks a lot. But the other thing unique about that design is as the logs cross over, they corbel out as as they get further up on the log wall, and they corbel out far enough to carry a walkway all the way around the perimeter. And at the second floor, they corbel out again, and they carry the roof out over the walkway. So
Okay.
it's a very unique design that we actually first saw in Wisconsin, an actual cabin like that, and then I found it in this book that was from the 1920s out in New England. So we've seen a couple of references to that cabin. It can be a little dark because of the overhangs, but you balance that by having, say, a lot of French doors in your rooms up above, so you feel as though you're directly connected to the outdoors through these French doors that go out onto the walkway. So it's a quite a unique cabin design. It has the technical problem of a lot of shrinkage. So as you know from studying logs, you have to deal with the shrinkage issue. So we had to presume that the collective log walls in the roof might settle up to 8 inches against the, you know, versus the chimney, which isn't going to move. So we had to design the flashing to be able to handle that kind of movement, which is pretty unique.
That is unique. What do you mind me asking when you made that? What year was that?
We probably did that about 15 years ago in
Hmm.
Northwest Wisconsin.
Do you follow up with people? Have you just heard from them how it's going?
Uh, I haven't in the last, say, 5, 6 years. So I did in the first few years, and they
Yeah.
were quite happy with it. Uh, and the log company that built it was coming back regularly to to do things like, you know, you've got screw jacks under vertical posts that have to be jacked down, and they had to make sure they were checking on the slippage against the fireplace, stuff like that. So
Yes, yeah.
it had to be observed in the early years, and we were aware of. We had a good log builder who did a good job of staying with the project.
That's great. That's really cool. One of the benefits of doing something like that too, from a log perspective, is the longevity of the logs.
Yeah,
Once they get their exterior stain, and if they have that overhang, you almost never have to restain them. I've heard that just that UV protection alone can be enough to almost make that part of it maintenance free to as much as possible.
yeah. Our clients were interested in the natural weathering color of the wood. It's Western red cedar
Mm.
from British Columbia that was brought out to the Midwest, and so they used the Lifetime product to sort of pre-weather the logs,
Hmm.
and that now is fully pre-weathered, so it looks really good.
Oh, wow. That sounds really beautiful. That's neat. That's a fun project. I love hearing about those creative stories that take like that extra ingenuity. Like I don't know, there's just so many moving pieces that I think go unseen to the untrained eye. So that's one of my favorite things about a podcast like this is to dive into those things where it's like there's just so much that goes into it before even the construction begins.
That's right. And
Yeah.
one of the things we have to know fairly early on with our clients is what's the particular building method we're going to build this cabin out of. So if we're going to build it out of logs, that's quite different than, say, building it out of a timber frame or building it out of a standard stick frame. And different kinds of vendors are going to get involved with each of those. So that comes in, each of those building methods has a discipline attached to it that you have to work through. And if you're building with logs, you can't have a wall that goes on forever because you don't typically want to butt the logs up against each other. So you have to break the wall and set it back and then start again. So and timber framing has, its rigor to how it's built. So yeah, we have to at least take a stab at which of those methods are likely to be the one that a particular client is going to need.
Do you have a personal preference? Like, if you went and built your dream cabin, what would it be like? Or maybe you already live in your own dream cabin.
I do have a cabin, and I think I sent you a photo that's got a red column in the front. Uh,
Oh, yes,
excuse
I
me.
saw that.
And that's an ash column that one day when I was out fishing, my wife painted red, uh, kind of a Chinese red. So we're known as the people on the lake that have the red post. Um, I, you know, I, I like so many different kinds of systems in a cabin that I often think that the most interesting cabin that I'm working on is the next one. Well, it's, the one I haven't done yet. So yeah, I don't have a singular, building method that I'm most intrigued with.
That's all right. I think that is the beauty of it, and that's probably why you're so good at what you do. Essentially, you love the creativity and the
Yeah,
exploration.
yeah,
Feeling into the project before it's even come to be. That's the best part.
yeah.
Oh my goodness. So it's been a great conversation. Tell me about your books. Like what you've got quite an
Uh,
extensive book
sure.
collection.
Yeah, I've done 6 books. The first one I did was called The Architecture of Edwin Lundy. Edwin Lundy was a designer of fine homes. He lived in St. Paul, worked in St. Paul, Minnesota, and he worked for families in St. Paul that were just beginning to move to the suburbs and create kind of family estates. So he did some beautiful houses, both in the city and out of the city. But then he started also doing cabins, and he built some sort of Scandinavian-looking cabins up on Lake Superior, particularly the North Shore of Lake Superior. And so I had became fascinated in his work, and I started recording it and photographing it. And then eventually I did a book with the Minnesota Historical Society Press, published it. I then got, after doing that research on cabins that I alluded to before, I started writing a column, and out of that came the notion that Taunton Press became interested in me in doing a cabin book. So I ended up doing 5 books for Taunton Press, and they are books that describe cabins that interest me from across the United States and Canada. And so each book has about each 4 of the 5 books are basically picture books, and they describe about 34, 35 cabins from across the United States. And they range anywhere from towers to very horizontal things, log cabins, old cabins, new cabins. So it's a wide variety of cabin structures. And yeah, so and then I did one book that's a little bit different, and it's called Cabinology, which is more of here are the things you should think about if you're going to be designing a cabin. So, what might you think about for your kitchen, or um, for the structure, or how to personalize your cabin and make it unique to you, stuff like that.
Okay, a random question. We don't talk about this very much on this podcast is A-frames.
Oh, they're great. Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, well, there's not a lot of room for logs in an A-frame. I mean, so it's just
Yeah.
not something Caribou's done a lot of, but I'm curious what your thoughts are on that.
Well, A-frames are quite a unique structure. They were very popular back in the 60s and 70s, then kind of ran out of favor. And now they're coming back. There seems to be a renewed interest in them. So our firm, I'm not working on it, but our firm, somebody else in the firm is working on an A-frame right now, a brand new one. I did and recorded in my Back to the Cabin book an A-frame that I did in addition to, and we did what we refer to as saddlebag additions to the A-frame. So you've got an A-frame, like this, and you're making kind of dormer pieces to increase the volume inside. They're pretty unique to figure out. They're very simple structures, and they're often you tend to only get windows on the 2 ends. You don't get very many windows out the sides of the longer sides of the A-frame. So they're not, you don't get some kind of an expansive view out like you would from, say, a stick frame or a timber frame structure. So depending upon your desire for view, that may or may not be applicable to what interests, what's appropriate.
Yeah. Well, another question is more of a modern question because I follow a lot of people on Instagram that are like cabins. They show these amazing pictures of these cabins that are primarily glass, like a lot of glass.
Yep.
And obviously, so we can see around and see those things. I think, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong because you're the expert, but is that more of a modern trend? And is that something that you guys see more people looking for?
The head of the School of Architecture where I went to school, University of Minnesota, a fellow by the name of Ralph Rapson, did a cabin for himself that is all glass. It
Wow.
is 4 sides, all glass, sliding glass doors, 3 stacks high. It's in my book called The Cabin, if you want to take a look at it. And he was a little concerned after all that he wasn't letting still enough light in, so he put a few skylights in the flat roof. It's a pretty amazing structure. So you visually feel you're outside, even though you're inside. And it was never designed to be a year-round structure, so he wasn't that worried about heat loss.
Mhm.
We have to be a little more concerned with heat loss in our upper Midwest climate. So we can't, if we have a lot of glass, we have to start looking at triple pane or something in order to make sure we're not losing too much energy.
Mm-hmm. Actually, that made me curious. I don't know very much about glass in general, but would it be affected by the temperature too much just in and of itself
Well, I mean,
structurally?
it's not affected in the sense that you don't have to worry about movement of the glass or something like that. But the glass, if you only have single pane glass in a cold climate, it can frost up on the inside, and you're losing a lot of energy through, if you're trying to heat a cabin in a minus 20-degree temperature like we might experience in northern Minnesota. It may be difficult to heat that cabin if you've got single pane glass in it. which would be characteristic of older cabins. But
Okay.
today we're commonly doing it as a minimum double pane windows with argon gas in between to have a better R value in the glass. And then we're doing a cabin right now, which is going to essentially almost require no energy, even though it's built in northern Minnesota. But we have triple pane glass in there, and we have double walls to the skin of the cabin. So it's going to take very, very little heat to keep that cabin warm.
That's interesting. Wow. That's such a dynamic conversation. I'm really excited that you joined me here. This has been
Yeah,
truly
fun.
interesting. Yeah.
I love talking about this. So anytime you want to have me on, let me know.
Okay. Sounds good. I think I'm going to pick up some of your books. Maybe that'll be a topic for next time we can
Yeah,
dive into
great.
some of those. So yeah, thank you so much. Where can people connect with you if they want to work with you?
Sure. They can take a look at Sala, Sala Architects, and they can see on our website the work of our firm. We have several different designers, so we have a lot of different designs. And they can also find my books by looking up Dale Mulfinger, cabinologist, and find my books that way. So either way, they can hunt me down. Otherwise, they can reach me by my office phone is 612-767-4124.
Does the whole firm do just cabins or do you guys do any type of homes?
We do any type of home, both additions, remodels, and new homes. And I would say most of the additions well, some of the additions we're doing are in cabins. And but we do a lot of work in the metropolitan area of Minneapolis and St. Paul. And we find that additions and remodelings are a great place for young staff to learn from, and then they kind of graduate to doing bigger projects and new homes or whatever. But yeah, I would say in our firm, maybe 60% of our work is cabin related or second
Okay.
home related, and
Hmm.
about 40% are additions, remodelings in the city.
All right. Very nice. Thank you so much. This has been a
All
true
right.
pleasure.
All right. Nice talking to you, Lindsay.
You too.